Hi, everyone. I think we're good to go here. If you're ready, Farzy. Before we begin, I'm just going to do a quick intro. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Austin from the School of Cities, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's Knowledge Cafe with Farzana Hamasi. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that this land on which we meet today is the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. I hope that our conversation today generates insights and thoughtful reflection on how we may be better stewards of this land in the spirit of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Agreement, an agreement on how the land can be shared to the mutual benefit of all its inhabitants. As we hear about one of Toronto's most diverse neighborhoods today, it is important to remember that against its rich multicultural nature, as a settler community, there exists ongoing legacies of colonialism, both within Kensington and Toronto as a whole. Knowledge Cafe is brought to you by the School of Cities, the University of Toronto's multidisciplinary Centre for Urban Research, Education, and Engagement, dedicated to discovering new ways for cities and residents to thrive. The Knowledge Cafe at the School of Cities is a monthly speaking opportunity for the tri-campus community at U of T to present insights and highlights of their research on a theme that is important and relevant to cities. It provides a platform for faculty, students, and researchers who are working to uncover solutions to creating more just, equitable, sustainable, and prosperous cities. Today's session is actually the swan song of this season of Knowledge Cafe, featuring Professor Farzi Hamasi of the University of Toronto's Faculty of Music on the subject of community consultation and the soundscape of Kensington Market. Professor Hamasi conducts research in two areas: music and community in Toronto's Kensington Market and post-revolutionary Iranian popular music and politics in diaspora. She is the author of the award-winning monograph Tehrangelis Dreaming, Intimacy and Imagination in Southern California's Iranian Pop Music. Her Kensington research has received support from the SSHRC, the Connaught Fund, the Critical Digital Humanities Institute, and the Jackman Humanities Institute, where she'll be a faculty fellow in 2023. Just as last-minute housekeeping, as a reminder, today's session is being recorded. We ask all attendees to please keep your mics on mute during the discussion. We encourage attendees to send all questions and comments through the chat, or they'll be collected and answered at the end of the session. Lastly, please use good etiquette. People will be removed from the meeting for inappropriate language or behavior. Without further ado, I'm going to hand today's session over to Farzi. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's really nice to be here. Thank you very much, Austin, and to School of Cities for giving me this opportunity to present. And hello to friends and familiar faces or names, as the case may be, in chat. Thanks to so many community members from Kensington for coming, especially. So I'm going to share my screen now, and then we will get started. Okay, can everybody see this? I hope. Yes, I'm going to guess yes.
We can, yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, great. So today's presentation, I'm going to walk you a little bit through some research I've been doing with community members in Kensington Market and with graduate students and one undergraduate student for the past few years. And the title of the talk is "Do You Hear What I Hear? Accounting for Subjectivity in Community Consultation." And I should say, I think about community consultation both in the way that maybe urban planners or other folks who work in community do, which is a formal process in which community input and consensus is generated in person, and also as part of the ethnographic method, which is what I'm trained in as an ethnomusicologist, which, for those of you who've never heard of that before, is the anthropological study of music and sound. So we talk to people and we listen to what they say. So consulting with community is I'm thinking of it in several different ways. Let's see here. Okay, good. Before we get started too far, I want to thank so many people in the community. Some of the people on this slide are on the call today. None of this research would be possible without the generosity and openness of so many individuals, not all of whom who are listed here, in speaking to me over the past few years and speaking to graduate students as well, as we have sought to understand this really fascinating, important, and complicated neighborhood and how it's dealing with all of the many changes that face it. I also want to thank funders and institutional supports. I won't go through all of this list, but just to say thank you to many people for helping to make this possible. Okay, so the Kensington Market Soundscape Study is geographically situated in Kensington Market. So this could be thought of as Toronto's most famous immigrant neighborhood. There are many immigrant neighborhoods in Toronto, but this is one of our most famous, most storied, one of the neighborhoods that people use to tell the story of Toronto as a place where newcomers make new lives for themselves. It also, an additional key term, the object of the study, especially as it started out, was the soundscape of Kensington Market. So in this case, soundscape is a sort of, 20th century neologism that means the auditory environment. It's a combination of human and non-human sounds, especially in an urban environment. Many of the sounds that we hear are non-human, right? They're motorized vehicles or the sounds that may be generated by humans, but are using musical instruments or car horns, et cetera, and so forth. So you can compare this to landscape and to streetscape, as in the environment around. But one thing that one might keep in mind about soundscapes is that they aren't fixed. They change, right? They change from day to day, from season to season, from time to time. And this is something we found, especially in Kensington Market, as we were thinking about how people use the space, is that depending on how people use the space, obviously the way the space sounds changes. So even though soundscape is a singular word, you should think of it as multiple different auditory environments within a bounded geographical space. So as the project has continued, our focus has shifted a little bit to include not only the object of the soundscape, but listening as an object of study. And I mean by this that we talk to people in the neighborhood about how they hear and how they understand the sounds that they hear. What do they listen to? What makes sense to them? What is most important to them about what they hear? What do they not like? Sounds can be perceived differently by different people. And while this is a really basic sort of non-mind-blowing observation, it becomes quite important when you try to regulate sound, especially based on objective standards. So listening is also a method of study. I've already mentioned that I'm trained as an ethnographer. The students that I work with are ethnomusicology and anthropology students, and we use listening as a very carefully. We have gone to many community meetings, done some interviewing with people, paid attention to the soundscape. And so listening is both a method and an object for the study, and one that is important whether we recognize it or not as such to all of our communication, something that we really have to highlight in dealing with communities all the time, especially if we're coming from academia with the sort of oftentimes with the presumption that we know what we're talking about. So in as much as this is Knowledge Cafe, I'd like to maybe suggest changing the title, at least as far as my presentation goes, to Learning Cafe and Knowing Cafe, rather than a bunch of knowledge that I'm going to hit you with. So I think whether or not you most of us have probably been to Kensington Market before if we're in the Greater Toronto area. I thought it would be helpful to think about Kensington Market from an outsider's perspective. And here I've got some map and some text that is from the Toronto Tourism website. So just briefly, the tagline here is Old World Charm, New World Vitality. Kensington Market offers, so why you should go, right? So assuming that it's talking to people from outside the neighborhood. Kensington Market offers a fascinating living history tour of the immigrant populations who built Toronto. The closest we have to an old world marketplace, you'll find an Arabian spice store nestled next to a Jewish grocery, next to a Caribbean fruit stand beside a Chilean produce store. So on and so forth. It talks about the food and the clothes, vintage clothes, and different sorts of quirky stores. This is, in fact, the association that many of us would have with Kensington, and maybe some of the way that we interact with Kensington as a place to get special groceries, to have certain types of experiences, and to come and go. It's not the reality of Kensington in an everyday way for many of the residents and businesses there. But before we get to that, I also want to highlight that Kensington Market is a gathering place for many diverse groups. So people do go there to shop. People also go there to socialize. This is an image of a drum circle that happened last July, but happens pretty regularly during the summer months, especially on the days when there's the Pedestrian Sundays street festival that I'll talk about a little bit more. So in as much as Kensington Market is a distinctive neighborhood with geographical bounds and with many, many people who live there and work there, it is also a place that many people come. And so the associations that come with Kensington are not only the immigrant history and present, the small shops, the market, culture, etc., but also it has garnered a reputation as a place where people are a little bit more free in public space. So that freedom you could think of in many different ways. One might be the gathering that we see here, and another that ended up being a use of public space during the pandemic was that sometimes the anti-lockdown protests would target Kensington as a place to go. So I'm going to play just a brief video of that I found on YouTube from 2021. And this is something that Kensington residents and business owners have talked to me about, also about what it was like to have their neighborhood become a place of anti-lockdown protests.
We're using you like dogs. You're picking on the free people.
The new world order. Love your children. Love your grandchildren. Say no to tyranny.
Unifythepeople.ca. Yeah, peaceful assembly.
This video goes on for some time and I won't play more, but I think one of the reasons I wanted to show this is because of the discourse of freedom that went around at that really circulated during these kinds of protests and with the convoys and other types of anti-lockdown and anti-vax movements during the pandemic, and that to a certain extent continues today. There are different definitions of what it means to be free, and different ways we might think of freedom as being free from exposure to COVID-19, right? So there are different methods of pursuing freedom and different ways in which diverse groups define this freedom, and they collide sometimes in the way that public space is used and in the way that public space sounds. So in addition to being all of these things for other people, for people who live there and work there, Kensington Market is also a mixed use neighborhood with exceptional demographic density and diversity. There are 4,000 to 5,000 residents, including renters, homeowners, and unhoused people, many active community organizations that sometimes work in harmony with one another and sometimes not so much. A list of them is there. And about 250 businesses, some of the fresh and dry goods sellers that we saw referenced in the Toronto tourism document, and increasing numbers of cannabis retailers, bars, restaurants, and cafes. So the neighborhood is changing, always. So during the pandemic, the context for the Kensington Market Soundscape Study is really the pandemic and the exit from pandemic lockdown. During the pandemic, some of the conversations that I was lucky enough to be included in were part of what was called the Kensington Market Sound and Noise Steering Committee. So this was a group of residents and business owners with some representation from the from the Kensington Market Business Improvement Association, which is my official community partner on this project, I should say. These meetings were held in response to the perception from folks living in and spending a lot of time in the neighborhood that their neighborhood had actually become louder. We often think about of the pandemic as a time when street noise quieted, there was less traffic, less people out, but in Kensington, it was said, because of this attitude that people can, as you can see in this quote, come here to make noise because they think there are no limits here, that somehow this neighborhood was exceptional, that people would congregate there in a way that they might not have done in, say, Forest Hill or where I live, near Christie Pitts Park. So people would bring their mobile speakers, they would bring large groups of people, sometimes cafes and restaurants would be open late, and there was a sort of freer atmosphere there. This poster that we see on the right side of the screen was commissioned by the KMBIA in response to members of the community, not all members of the community, but some members of the community feeling that Kensington's characteristic, accepting atmosphere and ethos had been somewhat abused and or taken too far during the pandemic. And so we see an image of a child who's closing her ears to the sound, the very diverse sound that's happening outside of her window. So you could imagine, I think I'll just keep going after that so that we can see that. But this poster appeared in some windows around the market, but it's not everybody, right? So some people didn't actually really agree with this approach either. So where the Kensington Market Soundscape Study really enters was with the post-lockdown return of the neighborhood's very famous, much loved Kensington Market's Pedestrian Sundays, which has been happening for more than 20 years or about 20 years now on Sundays, May through October, and that in which the streets are closed. So the streets are closed and they are open to performances, to street vendors, to people walking and taking the place of cars on that public space, basically increasing the amount of public space and space for socializing and commerce within the market for about 7 hours. So the reason this longstanding festival was controversial in its return after the pandemic was because of the slide that we saw before. To some residents, it felt that every day had become Pedestrian Sundays, right? Or that the neighborhood had been the public space because of the withdrawal from society and withdrawal from public space by many people during the pandemic lockdowns. Those who had felt that they wanted a space for freedom had been already using, and for self-expression and socializing, had been already using Kensington's public spaces, including its public park, Bellevue Square Park. So when it came time for Pedestrian Sundays to ramp up again post-lockdown, its reintroduction was opposed by some members of community and much sought by others who thought that it would bring more life to the neighborhood, more of a sense of the regular Kensington, and a special boost for businesses that had also suffered during this pandemic lockdown. So this is where my team and I entered. We, as Pedestrian Sundays is now produced by the Business Improvement Association, the BIA. It was a community originally outside of that, but for the past several years has been, or more than several, 10 years maybe, has been produced by the BIA. So we came in as partners to help produce the festival, to learn about the festival, and to understand how people were relating to the festival and the sound that it creates. So our objectives are to use qualitative research to better understand the complex interplay of desires, histories, and regulations, and to observe and aid the multiple parties in the community in finding means to manage the neighborhood's soundscape during and beyond PSK, that's Pedestrian Sundays, festival days. So our project's goal is to provide data, observations, and accounts to community members on all sides of the issue, so pro-PSK, anti-PSK, and everything in between, to collectively and equitably create a more mutually satisfactory soundscape for Kensington. This is a tall order, but I think what I can say is that we've had many, many generative conversations with people. We have been active in many different ways. So the general overview of the timeline, as we started attending meetings in 2021, and I'm going to give a shout out to Cassandra Alves, who was the BIA's coordinator, was the person who I originally started working with on this research, and who also got me this gig today. She has been working at School of Cities and recently moved on to another BIA actually. I assembled the research team in 2022. In April, we researched and volunteered at Pedestrian Sundays. We did some surveying and analysis for the second half of last year. And then this year we're doing analysis writing, creating presentation, and creating a digital platform to share the research. So here are our research team members. As I said, since listening is important, you should also know who the listeners are, right? So these are some of our listeners, and they're some of the people who have created some of the images that you're seeing here and taken some of the sound recordings that you're hearing as well. So I will go rather quickly through this, but some of the activities that we've done, this is a community engaged research project. So our activities have not simply been to observe, take notes and leave, but to actually try and engage by supporting and building the capacity of the BIA to respond to neighborhood concerns, requests, desires about this festival that takes over the streets several times a year. And so part of our research activities has involved thinking about the Toronto noise bylaw, which was revised in 2017 and will be up for revision again. So thinking about what are the mechanisms for making adjustments to sound? What are the tools that work for people? What do people want from the tools that are available to them? And where do these tools fall short? And I will emphasize that our sound and PSK related research activities have involved listening, listening, talking, listening, listening, listening. So emphasis on the listening. The issues that have come to the fore throughout this are the freedom of expression and the right to quiet. This is a major issue, not just for Kensington Market, which is why I feel that I want to present this more broadly, is that this is not just a community issue, but this is an issue about how human beings share space, and urban space in particular, where our city is becoming more and more dense, it's becoming more and more populated. And as we bring more people to the center of Toronto, we will have a diversity of opinions and modes of communication, sensitivities, and so on in how we share that space, which includes how we make sound and how we perceive sound in that space. So our questions have been, who is making the sounds? Who objects to which sounds? Who enjoys which sounds? Who speaks to the city and other officials on behalf of the neighborhood? Who has the right to make which sounds and when? Was it always loud? Is it louder now? This kind of before and after idea is important because of understanding what Kensington should sound like or what it did sound like, and then what it should sound like in the future, right? So this kind of historical memory of sound is also an object of our research. How are sounds perceived and interpreted by different people? How are sounds perceived and interpreted differently depending on context? And what community and legal mechanisms exist for dealing with conflict over sound? So we know the study's objectives now. Hopefully you feel clear on that, but is the study objective? I couldn't resist that pun. This comes to the title of the talk, which is, do you hear what I hear? Well, do you hear what I hear is the name of this kind of not my favorite Christmas carol. And the answer in that is, do you hear what I hear? You should be hearing what I hear. You should hear the arrival of Christ and so on. But this song always goes through my head when I'm doing research in Kensington because it is one of our basic questions. Do you hear what I hear? Do people hear the same things? Objectively, they may hear this cloud of sound over here on the right. But what about this mechanism here that on the left that is drawn in kind of in a generalized way, that we all should have the same ears, right? But we don't all have the same ears. We have really different ears. Our ears are different in all of these ways that signal our position in society, where we are in society, our age, our ability or disability. Hearing depends, people who have different types of neurodivergence hear and perceive and understand sound differently. Mental health can mean mental health conditions can have a relationship to how sound is heard and what impact it has on people. It depends when we're hearing it and so on. And so this kind of object, the sound, the soundscape, the sound itself versus the perception of the sound is really where the rub is, and the rub is, and where the interest is for me, but also where the problem is in terms of applying policy, bylaw, and objective standards like decibels to the regulation of sound in an actual real social situation. So the bylaws definition, the Toronto bylaws definition of noise is noise, a sound that a person finds disturbing to their peace, rest, enjoyment, comfort, or convenience. Right away, we know that this is a subjective definition, right? Because who is this person? A person. I may not perceive it as noise. You may perceive it as noise. Sound is the generic term for this. Noise would be the specific sound, the specific understanding of and is essentially, in this case, according to this bylaw, a value judgment on the sound. It is negative. It's a preference, right? A preference or or the opposite. We can also think of sound or noise rather in a different way. So it can be unwanted sound, which is how the World Health Organization has defined it actually as well, or a combination of sounds that has adverse effects on health. This latter definition of sound as relating to health is a little bit more difficult to apply because people will react to certain types of noise differently. Now, there's a threshold at which sound creates physical damage, right? That can happen for sure. But if we're talking about things like neurodivergence or mental health or other conditions that we may not yet know about, the understanding of health of sound as sound and harm is much harder to figure out, and again, incredibly subjective. So in Toronto, if you want the bylaw officer to come and to give a ticket, the noise that you're hearing has to be unreasonable and persistent. So unreasonable noise is any noise that would disturb the peace, rest, enjoyment, comfort, or convenience of a reasonable person. This raises the question of who the reasonable person is. Now, the reasonable person standard in law is commonly used. It's sort of a legal fiction that's supposed to think about, supposed to help us conceive a kind of set of norms or a set of basic fundamental starting point around which different types of decisions about proper conduct and ethical conduct can be determined. But noise and its interpretation is also cultural. And especially in a hyperdiverse place like Toronto and in a hyperdiverse neighborhood like Kensington Market, the reasonable and the unreasonable, I think, are not quite clear. So I'll give an example. And this we are, Neil, I see you in the audience. This is Neil right here. Neil is one of the research assistants who has worked the most on this project. And this is a recording that, that Neil made of the Pedestrian Sundays drum circle, which is not to say that the drum circle was programmed as part of Pedestrian Sundays, but it's something that happened during that time. So just to give you a sense of how the space is being used here, I'll play this. So this drum circle is not amplified sound, which was a concern for the neighborhood and is a category about which you can make a noise complaint. It was, however, it is persistent, and the drum circle sometimes lasts 6-7 hours, and on past the time of Pedestrian Sundays, of which it is not officially a part anyway. It is also very, very enjoyable for the people who are congregating and getting together to make this joyful noise together in Bellevue Square Park. Bellevue Square Park is just a few feet away from many, many residences, and residents are, whether they want to or not, orally included in the soundscape of this drum circle as it occurs. So who has the right to this space? Who has the right to this? Thank you very much. I'm going to blow past this this section so that we make sure we have time for questions and comments, but just to point to some research by Sarah Gwendolyn Ross about how Canada's current noise control and noise pollution legislation, bylaws, et cetera, work. The emphasis is currently on the greater importance on the quiet enjoyment of private property over live music culture, where performances are often the subject of noise complaints. So, the drum circle, whether you like it or not, is whether it's annoying to you or harmful to you, is live music, right? And so the one of the tensions in the neighborhood is about celebrating people's creative impulses and their ability to express themselves freely in public space, and the welcomingness of the neighborhood to this kind of expression, which many, many people in the neighborhood, even if they're annoyed by that particular example, still celebrate, versus the right to have some peace and quiet when you want it, which is really difficult, but also not particularly helped by our current bylaw situation. So I had a long conversation. I want to thank Mika Baraket for facilitating this email conversation with a bylaw officer, a noise bylaw officer, about how to think about reasonable people and the reasonable person standard when it comes to this. So I asked, but this is a rendering of an email conversation. So I asked, the reference to what reasonable people would find disturbing is not very clear. Moreover, reasonable people may have different standards and comfort levels with different kinds of noise and sound. What is a bylaw officer's approach when reasonable people disagree? Also, who is not considered reasonable? So MLS, so that's Municipal Licensing and Standards, replied, for these types of situations, officers will determine what is reasonable on a case-by-case basis, reviewing as many different factors as possible. So this has to do with time, how long the noise lasts, environment, and so on and so forth. I think anybody who lives in Kensington, and perhaps anybody who lives in Toronto, knows that getting a noise bylaw officer to come and actually do anything about sound is not very easy. It's difficult because of the way their systems work. So it's a little bit beyond their ability to intervene. So I want to wrap up by saying, because I don't want to go into all of this, but to say that the legal and the governmental approach to regulating sound has been really has not met the needs of the residents. And so I wanted to show, and that's not to say that I think that all of the noise should be regulated either, or all of the sound should be regulated, but to say that when we listen to how people listen, so when you listen to how people hear, and when we really observe, we learn a lot. And we learn that one of the most important things they can do is try and listen to one another. So I just wanted to close with this, which is one of my favorite images, captured again by Neil Bastarak, of a defaced sign in Bellevue Square Park. This sign has a no music sign on it, and reads, unless authorized by permit, no person shall operate loudspeakers or amplifying equipment from any source in the park. And someone has gone to the trouble of climbing up on something to object to the objection by whiting out the anti-musical note sign with this. So I think one of my favorite things about working in Kensington is that people say what they think and they demonstrate what they think. And so we're able to hear them and listen to them. And through that, we're able to understand much better what the needs are and where we should go. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Rose. That was a really amazing presentation. We're going to open the floor up to any questions now, if anybody wants to pop them in the chat or turn their mic on and ask. We do have a couple that were submitted ahead of time too, to get conversation rolling. Just give me 1 second here. So one person asked, what drew you to Kensington for your study in particular?
Could you repeat that slightly more slowly, Austin?
Yeah, sorry. What drew you to Kensington in particular for your research?
Well, I was really,
oh,
sorry,
you went on
yep, sorry. I love Kensington Market as a visitor. I'm not a resident. One of my favorite, I lived in New York for 15 years before moving to Toronto to work at University of Toronto. And Kensington reminded me a lot of various places in New York where I felt really at home. I also come from an immigrant background. My family is Iranian and American, and have many fond memories of going to various types of immigrant market neighborhoods around the United States to get what I needed and for our family to get what we needed. I think another thing I really liked about Kensington is that no one group dominates demographically. And so there's sort of a place for everybody, which I think draws a lot of people in. On a more practical level, the ethnography lab at University of Toronto in the anthropology department has a project called the Kensington Market Research Project that was founded by anthropologist and now Associate Dean of Graduate Studies at University of Toronto, Joshua Barker. And this was a collaborative team-based ethnographic project to look at change in Kensington over the long term. When I first heard about this project, I got really excited. I asked Joshua if there was a sound and noise component to it. He said no. And so I asked if I could start that. He graciously allowed me to. And so that has been the starting point for a lot of different kinds of activities. So the framework, the sort of theoretical and methodological framework was already there to do a lot with. And so it's just been fascinating to do it. I feel so lucky.
Kind of this bouncing off of that, we have another question in the chat. Would you personally like to live in Kensington? Please comment on your thoughts on why you would or wouldn't.
I have often thought that I should live in Kensington so that I can make informed decisions, or not decisions, assessments from the perspective of somebody who has to sleep there at night, which is I think the time when it can be really challenging for people who are sensitive or exposed to a lot of sound. I think it would be really fun to live in Kensington for a little while. I don't know what it would be like to live there all the time. I do know some people who have been thinking a lot about leaving the market, who've lived there, and some who have left the market. So I don't know, maybe in another lifetime or some other time I get a chance to. Right now, I feel very lucky to be able to ride my bike there very regularly. So
I had family living in the market, and it was definitely an uphill battle adjusting to all the hustle bustle.
Yeah. I'm seeing something in the chat. Is it okay for me to respond to that one, Austin?
Go
Okay.
ahead.
So one of your research goals was to suggest ways to better manage the soundscape. What have you come up with so far in terms of management, other than the idea of listening to each other? Good question. I think the most important thing is that people in the market need to, are already do, right? People in neighborhoods already do talk to one another. About what's about the kinds of sound that they can and can't tolerate or have, or where their limits are. And I think what's not captured in what I've already told you is that there are many business owners in the market who are incredibly sensitive to what their neighbors want and what their neighbors prefer. They have agreements with neighbors about when they're going to stop music, and they're very clear about that. They're open conversations about that. I think enforcement by police or bylaw officers gets very tricky. There's understandably also a lot of anti-police and suspicion around law enforcement. And I think that's especially true in the aftermath of Black Lives Matter, but it also was there already. So Ray, without wanting to hedge too much, I think it's clearer what doesn't work and what is more difficult. I think knowing your neighbors is one of the most important things that one can do. And what gets more challenging about this in Kensington is, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, it's not just a neighborhood occupied by people who live and work there. It's many people who come and visit. And so that kind of, this is how our neighborhood is, this is how you should function once you're in our neighborhood. That kind of sort of code of conduct isn't really something one can enforce, right? There's no gate that you open and a contract you sign about how you're going to behave when you come in, as there wouldn't be. But it is something that we've talked about, should there be neighborhood ambassadors? Yeah. Yes, okay, Shamez is talking about, so Shamez Amlani, who has just commented, is one of the founders of Kensington Market. It's Pedestrian Sundays Festival. So interesting to know the difference between a drum circle that drones on in repetition for hours and versus a drum performance, say by an Afro-Brazilian marching band, which is what is often programmed to close Pedestrian Sundays. Absolutely. And in fact, so the marching bands are arguably louder, but mobile and only last a short time. Many residents who hate the drum circle love the louder managed sounds of the marching band. Yes, completely. And I actually use that as an example in one of my classes. I use Maracatu, Maramberto, and the drum circle as to show these are both the same kinds of instruments, but how are they differently perceived by people who live there? So yeah, precisely. I see Zenon, who is a community member also, who would like to say something. Go ahead, Zenon.
Hi, thanks. So I live in Kensington. It's a little bit chilly today. And before I started, I was in the back doing a little bit of planting. All I can hear are songbirds, but that could change in an instant, as you know. But I have an observation about the bylaw. The bylaw wording, to me, it seems to avoid or sidestep the messiness of the objective public health issue of noise. For example, if there's an expert by a medical an expert medical professional diagnosis of a mental health condition related to noise, I mean that should be recognized as an objective expert condition and its relationship to noise. But the bylaw seems to totally ignore that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you and I have had conversations about this before where I would say, well, the definition of noise is that it's, unwanted sound. And you would say, no, there's a health thing. And so then I started doing the health research and thinking it's surprising. So when I search on key terms for noise and bylaw and health, so much of the information is about really loud sounds, like what it's like to live next to an airport, for instance. So that's like a limit of the ear, right? It's like the biological limit of the standard ear. Whereas when we get into various mental health conditions, I don't think that there is yet a sort of standard set of there aren't standards that are widely available or widely consulted as a way to talk about the impact of sound and noise on individuals experiencing those effects, right? So the issue of health also reminds me of masking, right? Like we wear a mask to protect ourselves and we wear a mask to protect other people. And when people stopped wearing masks, it wasn't that they're, which we haven't all, right? But when most people stopped wearing masks, it wasn't that the harm was no longer present for those people, it's that people stopped paying attention to it. And that reminds me a little bit of what you're saying about the sound and noise in terms of health and harm. It's about whose needs in those moments are prioritized. And sometimes I think at this point we can say that the needs of people who are negatively affected by loud or repetitive or ongoing or persistent noise are not part of the conversation, generally speaking.
Yeah, and I think the other analogy might be with secondhand smoke.
Yes.
And how smoking has evolved over the years.
That's right.
In public areas.
Yes, thank you very much. And I just saw an article that compared noise pollution to secondhand smoke. So we're hand in hand here. Thanks, Zenon. Let's see. Other neighborhoods in Toronto. Hi, Laura. Other neighborhoods in Toronto that face the same challenges. There may be neighborhoods that face similar challenges. I think one of the things that is really interesting is that the noise, so pretty much any music venue faces some of these challenges. Unless it's been soundproofed, the music venue will almost always encounter some kind of issue with sound and noise. So one of the interesting things in the current music office that's run by Mike Tanner at City Hall is, who's our city's music officer. If you didn't know that position exists, you should. It's really cool, and he's doing a lot of really interesting things. One thing that has happened since he's been in the office is that when a new condo building is built, and it's built next to an existing music venue, which is going to be loud, but there's something called the agent of change. Is it the principle? Somebody else here will know this better than me. There's an agent of change principle in which the condo building dwellers are not allowed to call and try and shut down are not allowed to really use noise complaints to shut down the existing music venue, because the music venue is already there, right? So it's a way of thinking about what function do these businesses, right? It's a business that relies on noise and sound and music. What right do they have to exist, and what kinds of agreements are we going to enter into when we put a huge condo tower next to a music venue? What kind of priorities are we going to say matter for that space? So in that case, the quiet enjoyment of private property that we talked about before with that slide with the Sarah Gwendolyn Ross, the quiet enjoyment of private property does not trump live music culture. So I'd say that people are trying to negotiate this all over the city in various ways. And one of the pieces of data that I'm waiting for from the city, which I finally am getting soon, is about noise complaint data for this entire neighborhood. And we're going to look at how many noise complaints have come through in the past couple of years, where people are complaining about, and what are they complaining about? Is it amplified sound? Is it construction? Is it dogs barking, and so on? And I think that's, not everybody calls 311 when they have an issue, especially if they've called 311 many, many times and it hasn't worked, or if they just don't even think of that, right? Because not everybody does think about calling 311. Doesn't mean there's not a problem. It just doesn't mean that's your solution to it. So at any rate, the 311 data will hopefully tell us something, at least, about what people have taken the time to call and make a complaint about. And I hope that that will be somewhat illuminating in terms of understanding where Kensington fits in there, where Pedestrian Sundays fits in there. We may find some surprising results. So I'm really looking forward to getting that data soon. Let's see, we've got here. Yes, okay. Yeah. So Shamez is going to talk about, okay, I'm going to go back and read Shamez's comment. Okay, as a restaurant worker who had to wear a mask for up to 16 hours a day during the pandemic, often running around and up and down stairs in hot summer weather, mask wearing had a bad effect on my health. The analogy with noise then, we accept as necessary the noise of traffic and construction and emergency vehicles, but for some of us, the sound of music that connects us to other cultures and our ancestors are healing and joyful. Great way to round it off, I think, Shamez, in that there's this also has to do so much with perception and with the subjective, right? Like I don't want to wear a mask for 16 hours a day and run up and down. And I think when Pedestrian Sundays came back, for some people, maybe it was oppressive. For other people, it was incredibly joyful. Just really important to be able to socialize in the streets again, to be together, to have this ability to be with one another. And not everybody who had a problem with some of the sound at Kensington Market Pedestrian Sundays hates it, right? They just maybe think it's loud and lasts a long time, right? There's lots of nuance here. And I think that the more you listen, the more confusing and awesome it gets. Was that a hand from you, Nicole?
I was only going to jump in and say, because David Perlman is at the Center for Social Innovation. He slipped me the link, and our little team, we're third-party facilitators for governments only. We don't work for private actors, interestingly, because it's the public actor that has the burden to find the common ground, if there is any, between multiple points of view. And anything that isn't polarized usually really helps, or trying to in finding the middle ground. So David says you're excellent, and so it was really a pleasure to listen. I just wanted to flag that in 2019, for those on the call who are interested, in 2019, the city did a public consultation, one of many they've been doing over the years, on updating the noise bylaw. And so there's a public report on the common ground that was found there, which was sufficient to enable council to agree on updating that bylaw for the first time in what had been years and years and years and years, because that's what happened. When a community can't find the common ground, then council gets stuck. It happens on, like the previous question, it happens on lots of issues, including like bylaw, what statutory holidays Toronto has, or like, anyway, all this to flag is that two things. One, in 2019, there's a nice and deep public consultation report that managed to find some common ground where there hadn't been before, enough to update the bylaw, and that the city does try on a regular basis on issues to do the kind of work that you and your team we're doing, but obviously through different lenses. And I know what's happening right now in Kensington regarding pedestrian infrastructure, even, which David is in the next room talking our ear off. But anyway, so all this to say is I wanted to say hello, let you know that work had happened, and say that I was super happy to listen in on the presentation.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I hear they're going to revise those bylaws again. So we'll see.
And health never used to be a criteria. And in the consultation, the number one feedback was make sure public health is in there, and it's in there. So, when people come to meetings and say stuff and everybody says the same thing, usually governments follow, and that's the order of events.
Great. We hope we can get that working on the pedestrianization issue as well. So another topic, I have a slide hiding in the end of the deck about that as well, but
So we're unfortunately reaching the end of our time. Is there any concluding remarks you want to make, Francie?
just to say thanks so much to everybody. I really appreciate it. And especially thanks to community members and people that I'm working with right now. A lot of them came to this talk, so it means a lot to me, and for the opportunity to share this research with all of you, which is, it only matters if you get to share it with people. So I think that's great. Glad to have the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our attendees today.